Hi, here is the screencast for Chapter 1, Section 1. So this first section is about expressions and formulas. So we're going to cover order of operations first, and hopefully you have remembered what PEMDAS means. So PEMDAS is just the order that you go through. So first you have parentheses, and then you look to see if you have any exponents that you need to calculate. And then you have multiplication and division, and last is adding and subtracting. And so you have to work through them in order. So I evaluate the expressions inside grouping symbols, so that's with parentheses, evaluate all powers, so that's exponents, multiply, divide from left to right, and then add or subtract from left to right. So this first example, we evaluate the following expressions if m is equal to 12 and q is equal to -1. So I'm just going to go ahead and put in these numbers. So m is equal to 12, 3 minus q is equal to -1, and that's squared. So the first thing I need to do is solve inside for the parentheses. So we have 3 minus a -1. So that's the same thing as saying 3 plus 1. So inside our parentheses, that would equal 4. So I'll just rewrite 12 plus 4 squared. The next order of our operations is to do the exponent. So here we have 4 squared. So that's just 4 times 4, so it's 16. And lastly, we do the addition. So 12 plus 16 is equal to 28. Cool. Let's go ahead and try B. So m, once again, is equal to 12, plus 2, q is -1, plus 4. The first thing we need to do is multiply, and then we can go ahead and add everything together. So we have 12, 2 times a -1 is going to be -2. So you either can put a plus -2 or just do -2. Plus 4, and then you work left to right. So 12 minus 2 is 10. Plus 4 gives an answer of 14. Here we have q, remember, q is -1, so I put in -1 squared minus m, which is 12, plus, here, remember, q is -1. So -1 squared is going to be 1, the negatives cancel out, but then you have this negative sign that's still out front here. So although when you square your -1 and it turns positive, you keep the negative out front because this pesky little negative sign right here. Minus, and then you need to go through and do the parentheses. So 12 plus a -1 is the same thing as saying 12 minus 1. So that's 11. So -1 minus 11 is -12. I apologize, I should have went through and did the parentheses first, and then did the exponent, and then went through and added them. Lastly, we have q, which is -1, squared minus 2, m is 12, plus q is -1, divided by 1/2, 12 is m, plus 17. So let's go ahead and do the parentheses first. Let me move this up, get a little more room. So we know that 12 plus a -1 is 11. And then you do -2. I just have to rewrite everything. I'm going to go ahead and save a step and do this exponent right here. So we know that -1 times -1, or -1 squared, is going to be a +1, but we still have this negative sign out front, so it's going to be a -1. Let's see, 1/2 of 12 is 6, plus 17. All right, let's simplify the top and the bottom, and then we can do the last division. So we have -1, let's see, -2 times 11 is -22. 6 plus 17 is going to be 23. So -1 minus 22 is negative 23 over 23. So I'll simplify to negative 1. Cool. All right, so let's try these next examples. If you want, you can pause the video, try them yourself, and then come back and do it together. So I'm just going to sub in the values. The value of the expressions of A is 5, B is negative 3.2. So A is 5 plus, let's see, B negative 3.2 squared times B negative 3.2 minus A, which is 5. So I'm going to go ahead, do this parenthesis out. So you have negative 3.2 minus 5, so that'll be negative 8.2. We have also inside this parenthesis, negative 3.2 squared. So the negatives will cancel out. Square the 3.2, you get 10.24. And then 5 plus this. Cool. So we did parentheses first, then we did the power. We know that these two values are going to be multiplied together. So I can go ahead and multiply these two values, since the next order of operations after parentheses and exponents is multiplication. So when you multiply 10.24 times negative 8.2, you get negative 83.968. And don't forget to bring down this first term. So if I add 5 to this, you will get an answer of negative 78.97. So I'll just round a little bit. Cool. Let's try the next one. All right, so we have B squared. So negative 3.2 squared plus A squared, A is 5, all over negative B. So we need to do the top first to evaluate the parentheses, but inside the parentheses we have two sets of squaring. So I'll go ahead and rewrite the top. So negative 3.2 squared, well, we did that over here. We know it's 10.24. And we know the negatives cancel out. 5 squared is 25. And then on the bottom, these negatives will cancel each other out. So we'll have a positive 3.2. All right, so let's add the top together. 10.24 plus 25 is going to be 35.24, and divide by 3.2. So if you have your calculator, you can put this in, 35.24 divided by 3.2. You'll get an answer of 11.01. In both of these examples, I could have rounded to the nearest tenth, since the order of operations we had was to the nearest tenth. It doesn't really matter. Okay. All right, the third example says, evaluate the following expression if h is 4, j is negative 1, and k is 0.5. All right, so I'm just going to rewrite this with the values given. So j is negative 1 squared minus 3. Let's see, h is 4 squared times k, 0.5, divided by j to the third, so negative 1 to the third power plus 2. All right, so order of operations, what should we start with first? Well, it seems like to me we can start with all the exponents. So we can figure out what j squared is equal to, figure out what h squared is equal to, and figure out what j cubed is equal to. And we'll rewrite the whole thing. All right, so negative 1 squared, the negatives will cancel out, and we will get positive 1 minus 3, 4 squared is 16, times, I'm just going to rewrite 0.5 is 1/2, negative 1 to the third. Okay, so negative 1 times negative 1 is going to be positive 1. Multiply by negative 1 again, and you get negative 1. So we get negative 1 plus 2. Okay, so let's work through this multiplication. So we have 1 minus, let's see, half of 16 is 8. 8 times 3 is 24. Over negative 1 plus 2 is 1. So we get 1 minus 24 is negative 23 over 1 for a total answer of negative 23. Alright, so if I am going a little too fast, feel free to come in during bonus or ask more questions. So with this term right here, I just did 3 times 16 times 1/2. Well, 1/2 of 16 is going to be equal to 8, and then I did 3 times 8 for a total of 24. So a formula is a mathematical sentence that relates certain quantities. So here in this example 4, the formula F equals 9/5 times C plus 32 is how you convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So let's rearrange the formula to get an expression expressing the value of C in terms of F. So what this means is that we want to get C by itself. So let me rewrite this. We have F is equal to 9/5 C plus 32. Okay, so the first step to get C by itself is you go the opposite order of PEMDAS. And so PEMDAS, normally you always do parentheses first, and then you go through, evaluate exponents, and you multiply, divide, then add, subtract. Well, in order to get a certain variable by itself, you do the opposite. So you start with getting rid of any term that's added or subtracted, and then you can multiply or divide anything out, any coefficients on front, then deal with the exponents, then deal with any parentheses. So you're working from the lowest level to the highest level of operation. So here I have plus 32, so in order to get rid of that, I need to subtract 32 on both sides. So F minus 32 is equal to 9/5 C. Now here the issue is I'm done adding and subtracting. I have 9/5 times the degree. So in order to get rid of it, I have to do the inverse operation. So the inverse of operation of addition is subtraction. Here, instead of multiplying by 9/5, you may have heard this, I can divide by 9/5. So I can take C and divide by 9/5. Because for example, if I had 2x is equal to 4, to get rid of that 2, I just divide by it. Cool. Here I could divide by 9/5. But that's really ugly. I don't like doing that. It's easier for me to, instead of dividing by a fraction, I could multiply by the reciprocal, and it means the same thing. Divide by the fraction is equal to multiplying by the reciprocal. So I'm just going to multiply by 5/9, and look, the numbers cancel out. Multiply this whole term by 5/9. So I get 5/9 F minus 32 is equal to C. This is actually totally fine. You could leave it this way, or you could distribute this 5/9 term out to each term. So we would have C is equal to 5/9 F minus 5/9 times 32. So another way to write this, 5/9 F minus 17.77. Both would be correct. Honestly, it's just whatever works for you, whatever you understand. Okay, and the last part is, what is the Fahrenheit equivalent of 40 degrees Celsius? Okay, so we want to get the Fahrenheit, the equivalent of 40 degrees Celsius. So we already have the equation solved for Fahrenheit up here. So Fahrenheit is going to be equal to 9/5 Celsius. Here we have 40 degrees Celsius plus 32. So I don't even need my calculator to do this. So 5 is a common factor of 40. So we get 9 times 8, which is 72, plus 32. That will give me an answer of 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's pretty warm, but that makes sense. 40 degrees Celsius, pretty warm. And then here you have the assignment. You can go ahead and look on Haiku. Once again, if you have more questions about this, my bonus is Monday, Tuesday, Thursday in room 127. Please email me if you have any questions. Have a great day.